This story has already taken me to archives, to museums, and into pages of Anne Frank's diary. I've read her words, I've seen the photos, I've learned about the small rooms behind the bookshelf in Amsterdam, where she hid for more than 2 years. But now, the story takes me somewhere else. Not in a book, not in a museum, but to a real place. I'm flying to the north of Germany, to Bergen-Belsen. This is the place where Anne's life ended. She never came home. Many thousands of others also died here. Reading about history is one thing. Standing where it happened is something very different. You can feel the air. You can hear the silence. This is not just a trip for me. It's a way to understand, even a little, what books cannot explain. I do not know how I will feel when I arrive, but I know I must go. Some places you must see with your own eyes to truly understand.
Before she was the most famous diarist in the world, before her name became a symbol of hope, loss and remembrance, Anne Frank was just a young girl. A girl growing up in a normal family, in a normal city, in a world that was about to become anything but normal. This is not just the story of Anne Frank. It's the story of a family who made decisions, hard decisions, based on the changing world around them, a world that was becoming more dangerous by the day. Anne Frank was born in Frankfurt, Germany, in 1929. She had an older sister, Margot. Her father, Otto Frank, was a businessman. Her mother, Edith, took care of the household. They were German, they were educated, they were Jewish. But at that time, being Jewish wasn't a problem. At least, not yet. But things started changing in Germany, slowly at first, then faster. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power. He blamed the Jews for many of Germany's problems, and little by little, the rights of Jewish families were taken away. For the Franks, this was the moment everything began to shift. Otto Frank watched what was happening very carefully. He saw the signs, the growing hatred, the new laws, the violence, and he realized something that many people didn't want to admit. It was no longer safe to stay. So the family packed their things and left Germany. They didn't know exactly what would happen next, but they hoped that by leaving early, they could find a place to live in peace. The place, for a while, would be the Netherlands. Amsterdam was supposed to be a safe place, a place to start over, and for a while, it really was. When the Frank family settled into their new life in the Netherlands, they did what most families do. They tried to adjust, to rebuild, and to feel normal again. They found a home in Merwedeplein 37, in the south of the city, a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and tall apartment buildings, and slowly life began to move forward. Otto Frank became a businessman again. He set up a small company that sold things like pectin, herbs and spices. He worked in an office building near the Prinsengracht Canal. Nothing fancy, but it was a new beginning, a chance to focus on the future, not the past. Anne and her sister Margot were growing up. They went to school, made friends, learned Dutch. Anne was full of energy and ideas. She loved reading, writing, going to the movies. She had posters of film stars on her bedroom wall. She was curious about everything. Margot was more reserved, quiet and thoughtful, but just as clever. Both girls seemed to be adjusting well. They were starting to feel at home in this new city. But then, things began to shift again. Not suddenly, but slowly, in the background. At first, it was just small restrictions, new rules, quiet changes that made daily life harder for Jewish families. Over time, those changes grew into something much bigger. Anne had to switch to a Jewish school. Otto was forced to hand over the control of his company to a non-Jewish colleague. The world they had carefully rebuilt was shrinking, bit by bit. The fear returned, but this time there was no easy escape, so Otto Frank began to prepare, not for another move, but something else entirely, a hiding place, a plan, just in case. This was the moment before the world closed in, before the silence of the secret Annex, before Anne began writing her diary. In May of 1940, everything changed. The German army invaded the Netherlands. In just 5 days, the Dutch military surrendered. What followed was not just a military occupation, it was a takeover of daily life, a slow, careful, and brutal process of control. At first, many Dutch people tried to carry on as usual. Shops were open, trams were running, children went to school. But the Nazi system was already being built, quietly, efficiently, and with a clear goal to isolate, mark, and eventually remove all the Jewish people from society. Step by step, new rules were introduced. Jewish citizens were removed from public jobs. They had to register with the authorities. They were banned from parks, cinemas, libraries. Radios were taken away. Travel was restricted. Even bicycles were no longer allowed. And then came the yellow star, a small piece of fabric with one message: you are different. Jews were forced to sew it onto their clothes, day and night, everywhere they went. It was more than just a rule. It was a warning, a signal. By now, the Nazis had created a full system of persecution, names, addresses, files. They knew exactly where people lived, who they were, where they worked. They sent letters, made phone calls, knocked on doors. And then they started taking people away. This wasn't a war in the traditional sense. It was a war of information, of fear, of silence. Jews were being arrested and deported, first in small groups, then entire families. Trains left regularly from Amsterdam, heading east. Most people never came back. The Nazi regime used Dutch police, local civil servants, lists, documents, maps. The hunt for Jews was not wild or chaotic. It was organized, cold, bureaucratic. And it was getting closer. For the Frank family, the walls were closing in. They had delayed as long as they could. They had hoped things might change, but now they knew if they stayed where they were, they would be found. The time for planning was over. It was time to disappear. On the outside, nothing looked different. It was a warm summer morning in Amsterdam, July 6th, 1942. People were riding bikes. Shops were opening. Children were walking to school. But in one small apartment in the south of the city, something was happening that no one could see. The Frank family was disappearing, not in a dramatic way. There were no police, no trucks, no shouting, just 4 people, Otto, Edith, Margot, and Anne, leaving quietly, one by one, with layers of clothes on their backs and school bags that were secretly filled with essentials. They couldn't take a suitcase, that would look suspicious. They couldn't say goodbye to the neighbors, that would raise questions. They just left. The night before, Margot had received a call-up letter. The Nazis were ordering her to report for labor in Germany. But the family knew what that actually meant. They had heard stories, seen people vanish. This was the moment Otto had been preparing for. For months, he had worked in secret, together with trusted employees, to prepare a set of hidden rooms behind his business office in the Prinsengracht Canal. It was called the Arterios in Dutch, the secret Annex. It was hidden behind a swinging bookcase, narrow stairs, small rooms, covered windows. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't finished, but it was safe, or at least safer than being out in the open. The Franks didn't know how long they would stay, weeks, months. They hoped it wouldn't be long. They believed the war might end soon, that they could return home, but they never returned. The secret annex was small, about 50 square meters of usable space. It wasn't designed for one person, let alone 8, but over time, 8 people did live there, 8 people hiding, 8 people hoping to survive. First came the Frank family, Otto, Edith, and their 2 daughters, Margot and Anne. Then, a few days later, another family arrived, the Van Pels family. They had also fled from Germany. There was Hermann Van Pels, who had worked with Otto in the spice business. His wife, Auguste, strong-willed and proud, and their 16-year-old son, Peter, quiet and a bit shy. He would later become a close friend, and maybe something more for Anne. Finally, in November 1942, the 8th person entered the annex, Fritz Pfeffer, a dentist. He was a friend of Miep Gies, one of the helpers. Pfeffer needed a place to hide, and the annex was one of the few options left. He was older, strict, and ended up sharing a room with Anne, which, as she often wrote in her diary, wasn't always easy. These 8 people shared everything: meals, fears, silence, and the constant threat of discovery. But they were not alone. On the outside, a small group of incredibly brave people helped them to survive. They brought books, food, news, soap, paper for Anne's diary. They risked their freedom and their lives every single day. The helpers were Miep Gies, Otto Frank's loyal secretary, kind, calm, and determined. She was the one who kept Anne's diary safe after the arrest. Jan Gies, Miep's husband, part of the Dutch resistance. He helped supply ration cards and stayed in contact with other helpers. Victor Kugler, Otto's business partner, he helped prepare the hiding place and kept the company running as a cover. Johannes Kleiman, another trusted colleague. Despite his poor health, he played a major role in protecting the group. Beb Foskogel, a young typist who brought supplies and kept spirits up, especially for Anne. Johannes Foskogel, Beb's father, who helped build the secret bookcase and gave quiet support behind the scenes. These were ordinary people who chose to do something extraordinary. They didn't carry weapons, they didn't wear uniforms, but they resisted in the most human way possible. Without them, the 8 in the annex would not have lasted a single week. This hidden world, 8 people in silence, helped by 6 from the outside, survived together for over 2 years. This is Prinsengracht 263 in Amsterdam. At first glance, it looks like any other canal house in Amsterdam. Brick walls, tall windows, a quiet street by the water. But this building holds a secret. Behind this facade, hidden in the back, 8 people lived in complete silence for more than 2 years. They weren't criminals, they weren't dangerous. They were just trying to stay alive. This is where Anne Frank wrote her diary, where she grew up in hiding, where a group of ordinary people tried to survive something unimaginable. To understand what life was like here, we have to look inside, room by room. This was the ground-level store space of Otto Frank's business. It contained goods like spices and pectin, crates, barrels, and packing materials. Workers loaded and unloaded deliveries here. It's the part of the building that made the business seem active and normal from the outside. On the first floor, this room served as the staff kitchen. Office employees and warehouse workers would have lunch here. It had a sink, cupboards, and a small stove. This was Otto's personal office, where he managed the business. It was used during the day and then left empty in the evenings. It had a desk, filing cabinets, and maps on the wall. Next to Otto's office were desks for the helpers. These were used by Miep and others to run the front part of the business and support the people hiding behind the scenes. The staircase leading up to higher floors, which held additional storage spaces, and attics. These rooms were filled with boxes, spices, and preserves. They were rarely visited and were close to the secret entrance of the Annex. Important because the helpers used these rooms to smuggle food and supplies. An open attic used for long-term storage. It was above the offices and warehouse. This area was not accessible from the Annex. It was part of the uninhabited upper floors. This was the secret entrance to the Annex, hidden behind a movable bookcase. Only trusted helpers knew about it. Behind this bookcase, a steep staircase led up to the Annex. This small room had the only sink and toilet available for the 8 people in hiding. They had to use it quietly, especially during working hours, to avoid making noise. Anne shared this room with Fritz Pfeffer, the dentist. They didn't get along well, and Anne wrote about their tensions in her diary. She also used this room as her writing space. Anne's mother and sister slept here. It was a narrow room with simple beds and very little privacy. They spent much of their time here, reading or sewing. This was the central room of the Annex. The 8 people ate their meals here, had conversations, and sometimes celebrated holidays. It also doubled as a bedroom for Hermann and Auguste van Peltz. Peter had his own small room next to the attic stairs. He spent much of his time alone here and occasionally with Anne. They would talk, look out of the window, and later develop a quiet friendship. The stairs above his room led to the attic. This small attic space was used for storing potatoes, canned food, and other supplies. Anne and Peter sometimes went up here to get a bit fresh air and daylight from the small window. It was the only place where they could see the outside world. Life in the secret Annex followed a strict rhythm, not because they wanted structure, but because they had no choice. Every day, from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, they had to be completely silent. No footsteps, no toilet flushing, no running water. The people working in the front house, warehouse staff, office workers, couldn't know anyone was hiding just above their heads. So they moved slowly, spoke in whispers. They wore socks instead of shoes. And they timed their bathroom visit carefully, never when someone was walking below. During the day, they read, sewed, studied, or wrote. Anne spent hours at her desk, filling page after page in her diary, while the others sat quietly in their rooms. Every sound, every creak in the floor was a risk. Only when the office downstairs closed and the last worker left for the day did life begin to move again. After 6 p.m., the annex would come alive quietly. The toilet could be used. The small kitchen became a warm and crowded place as dinner was prepared on the gas stove. Sometimes they would talk, laugh, and even play games. They tried to stay human despite everything. At night, with the curtains drawn tight, the group would take turns moving around. Peter would feed the cat, Muschi. Edith might wash dishes. Otto might climb up to the attic to check supplies or just look at the stars through the tiny window. Anne would sometimes sneak into Peter's room to talk in secret. Two teenagers looking for comfort in a world that had stopped making sense. But even at night, they had to stay alert. Any noise could be heard through the walls. Any light could give them away. The fear of discovery never went away, not for a minute. And so their lives became a careful balance. Invisible by day, hidden in plain sight, alive at night, but only in the shadows. This was the daily life in the annex. Alive in waiting, alive in fear, and yet, somehow, alive that still found moments of hope. This is the moment everything changed. For more than 2 years, the Frank family had been hiding in a secret annex above the warehouse in the heart of Amsterdam. Every day was a test of patience, silence, and survival. They lived in fear, but also with hope. Hope that the war would end, that they would make it out alive, that this nightmare would not last forever. But on the morning of August 4th, 1944, the silence was broken. A group of people, Nazis and Dutch collaborators, stormed into the building. They moved fast, knowing exactly where to go. Within minutes, they found the hidden door behind the bookshelf. They climbed the stairs. They entered a secret space, and just like that, the Franks family's time in hiding was over. It's about the confusion, the fear, the shock that filled those tight rooms when the people in hiding realized it was over. It's about the arrest, how it happened, who was involved, and how the secret annex was finally discovered after so long. But it's also about the questions that still remain. Who betrayed them? How did the Nazis find out? And what happened to the 8 people who had risked everything by hiding in a small space? To understand this day, the day everything fell apart, we have to go deep, not just into the facts, but into the emotions of what it meant for Anne Frank and her family, and everyone who had fought to keep them safe. Because this was not just the end of a hiding place, it was the beginning of a journey through the darkest part of the war. After the Nazis stormed the secret annex on August 4th, 1944, the 8 people in hiding, including Anne Frank, her sister Margot, and their parents Otto and Edith, were taken away, first to a prison in Amsterdam, then to a place many Jews feared deeply, Westerbork. Westerbork was a transit camp. It means it wasn't a final destination. It was a place where people were held before being sent to concentration camps in the east. Conditions were tough, crowded, dirty, hopeless. But it was not yet the worst. For almost a month, the Frank family stayed in Westerbork. Because they were arrested, they were considered criminals, punishable prisoners. That meant no special treatment, no protection. Every day, trains left the camp, and on September 3rd, 1944, The Frank family was put on the very last train that ever left Westerbork for Auschwitz. That train ride took 3 days. It was long, painful, and terrifying. The cattle car was crowded with over 1,000 people. No food, no toilets, just fear. For many, it was already too much. When the train finally reached Auschwitz, the family was separated. Men from women. Otto Frank was sent to the men's part of the camp. Edith, Anne, and Margot were sent to the women's side. That was the last time Otto saw his wife and daughters. But the nightmare didn't stop here. Auschwitz was not just a labor camp, it was also a death camp. People were murdered there, every day in gas chambers, but the Frank family was not killed right away. They were used for labor. They were starving, freezing, and surrounded by death. Later that year, in October or November, the Nazis made another decision to move Anne and Margot again, this time to Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp in Germany. There, conditions were even worse. No proper shelter, no warm clothes, food was almost nothing. Diseases spread quickly, and Anne and Margot both became sick, very sick. In early 1945, just a few weeks before British soldiers liberated the camp, both girls died of typhus, a disease caused by lice, fever, and extreme exhaustion. Margot was 18, Anne was 15. Their mother, Edith Frank, had died a few weeks earlier in Auschwitz. She was so weak, she couldn't eat anymore. The only person who survived from the Annex was Otto Frank. After the war, he returned to Amsterdam. The war was over, but his family was gone. That's when he was given Anne's diary, the book she had written in secret during those long, quiet days in the Annex. And it was from those pages that the world would come to know Anne, not just as a victim, but as a voice, as a girl who dreamed, who thought deeply, who hoped, even when there was little reason to hope.
We are flying above peaceful landscapes now, trees, fields, quiet villages. From here, it looks calm, almost timeless. It's hard to believe that this gentle land once had one of the most brutal concentration camps of the Nazi time. Bergen-Belsen was not built as a death camp, but in the last months of the war, it became one. Starvation, disease, mass graves. This is the place where Anne Frank and her sister Margot died in winter of 1945. There were no gas chambers here, only sickness, hunger, and silence. Anne has no real grave, no headstone with her name, only a memorial stone that says in its own quiet way, she was here and she mattered. I'm about to land at the closest airfield. In a few minutes, I will stand in that place and I will make sure her story is never forgotten.
we've just arrived at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and the first thing you see when you arrive is this huge building. And it is very interesting because this side of the building is on a Jewish cemetery, and you are not allowed to build or dig into the soil of a Jewish cemetery. So what the architect did, here's the exact border where the cemetery starts, and the main part of the building is not on a cemetery, and only this huge cube here is reaching into the cemetery, which is allowed by German law, because if you have a look, it's really floating, so it's not touching the ground, and therefore, yeah, it's a very interesting concept to reach into the cemetery without touching it. And it's really connecting like the inside and the outside of the cemetery. So we have just arrived at barrack number 9 and barrack number 10. And according to the documentation here, this barrack was designed for 900 people. So it must be pretty cramped back in the day. And yeah, must be really horrible to be here. And if you would like to have a detailed review of all the remains here in the camp, just leave it in the comment and I will make sure to provide a nice video on this. I've now spent some time here on this grounds, and I realized that this was once full of people, not with visitors or people walking here with their children, but with prisoners. People were dying here, they were sick and hopeless. And also Anne Frank died here somewhere on the grounds, and we are now trying to find her memorial stone, which is also somewhere in this direction, and this is where we are now going. So when you start entering the camp, it actually looks pretty empty. So it just looks like a field, like nothing is here anymore, no buildings, only a few remains. But you start seeing those small hills over here. And also here we have one. So this is actually not a hill. It's written here in German, hier ruhen 2500 Tote, April 1945. This means that here, this is a mass grave, and this means that 2,500 dead people are buried here, and April 1945 is the liberation day of the camp, or the liberation year. And what is pretty interesting when you look at historical pictures, these hills have been much higher, but due to the decomposition of the bodies, they shrink year by year, and this is actually a pretty scary fact. And also, if you come closer, you can see some stones here. This is a Jewish tradition to put stones on graves, and there are many stones, and it means that many people are visiting this place, which is quite good. So people are not forgetting what happened here, and it's still in the memory of the people. So we have now arrived at a part of the camp where you have many of those memorial stones. They look like gravestones, but they are actually not. So those are just stones to remind of people who have been dying here, but the people are actually not buried here. And also the memorial stone of Anne Frank is over there, and this is where we now have a look on. So we have arrived at the memorial stone of Anne and Margot Frank. So they're actually not buried here, but somewhere in the mass graves. So this stone is to remember them specifically here in this area. So we are standing at the same soil she was standing on, breathing the same air, feeling the same wind. And when she started writing her diary in Amsterdam, she multiple times wrote that she didn't believe that somebody would ever read her diary, but her story went around the world millions of times. But this camp is not only about Anne Frank, it's about the other tens of thousands of people who died here. So this place is for remembering what happened, but should never happen again. So we've just finished the visit of the concentration camp, and we will now go to watch the exhibition in the documentation center to digest what we've just seen and gather some additional information. We will not bring you with us, so you can come and see everything yourself.